Hello everyone, welcome to the course of Goods and Services Tax. This course includes various areas and provisions in the case of Goods and Services Tax or GST. This course includes an introduction to GST, the levy and collection of GST, the different components of GST like State Goods and Service Tax, Central Goods and Service Tax, and Integrated Goods and Service Tax. It also includes the procedures for registration, the persons who are liable to get registered under GST, the different assessment methods, filing of returns, and finally the appeals and revisions in the case of GST. So before beginning with the introduction of GST, let us discuss what do you mean by tax. So the primary responsibility of every government is to spend money for the developmental activities of a country. So in order to develop a country, in order to spend some money, the government needs a revenue. Tax forms the main revenue of any government. So the government's responsibility is to collect the tax and fulfill the development needs of the society and the country. So what do you mean by tax? Yes, tax is a compulsory payment which is levied by the government upon the individuals. So as we see here, it is a compulsory payment. This tax can be classified into two main categories, which are namely the direct tax and the indirect tax. In India, direct tax may include income tax and indirect tax may include GST, customs duty, etc. So what is the difference between direct tax and indirect tax? In the case of direct tax, it is imposed and the incidence of the tax falls on the same person. For instance, in the case of income tax is imposed and also the incidence of tax, the responsibility or the liability to pay the tax falls on the same person. But on the contrary, this is not the case in the case of indirect tax. So let's see what are the differences. In the case of indirect tax, the impact and incident falls on two different persons, and in the case of direct tax, it falls on the same person. So when we talk about impact, what does it mean? Impact means the person on whom it is imposed first. In the case of income tax, it is imposed on the individual itself. And what does incidence means? Incidence means the person who bears the burden of the tax. The ultimate burden falls on that person. The direct tax is progressive in nature. It means whoever has the higher income, they need to pay a high rate of tax. But at the same time, indirect tax is regressive in nature. Irrespective of the income, being rich or poor, they need to pay the same amount of tax. But the payment of indirect tax is not known directly to the person who is paying it. Then we have the examples, income tax and GST and customs duty. So before the implementation of GST, there were so many taxes that existed in India. The one tax, one nation, one market policy subsumed different taxes, and GST was implemented in 2017. So now let's see what are the features of indirect taxes. Not GST, please note, it is not GST but indirect taxes. Indirect taxes are always a source of revenue for the government. So So it helps the government to carry out the developmental activities of a country. And indirect taxes are mainly levied upon the commodities and services, like commodity taxation. So, for instance, in the case of goods and services tax, tax is levied upon the goods as well as the services. In the case of the burden, as we have already seen, the GST or the indirect tax is paid by the supplier of the goods, and that is recovered from the buyer. The supplier needs to pay the tax, but the amount of tax or the amount of indirect tax is recovered from the buyer, which is included in the price of the product or price of the service. There is no perception of direct pinch, as I have already mentioned. The taxpayer pays the amount without knowing that he is paying the tax to the government. The tax amount is already included in the price of the product or service. And indirect taxation, it directly affects the prices of commodities and services. And also, most of the goods and services comes under the purview of indirect taxes. And thus it provides or it promotes social welfare. That means high taxes are imposed on very harmful products like alcohol, tobacco, etc. And it is regressive in nature. That means the same rate of tax is applicable to both rich and the poor. So why GST? Before the implementation of GST, there were several indirect taxes that was prevailing in India along with value added tax. So what was the reason behind the implementation of GST? Let's see. So GST is a unified, it is a multi-stage and consumption-based tax combining all stages like manufacture, sale and consumption of different goods and services. So when we talk about each and every concept, it is important to understand and be aware and to know about the history of it. So in the case of GST in India, we have a very long history. Let's go through it in a quick way. The indirect tax system was recommended to reform to introduce the GST in 2004. After that, the then Union Finance Minister Sri P. Chidambaram, he presented the central budget and announced GST will be implemented from 1st April 2010 onwards. But it was the NDA government who took a much effort in the Parliament on 19th December 2014, which was focused on the Constitution Bill 2014. The bill was passed in the Lok Sabha on 6th May 2015 and at the same time in the Rajya Sabha on 3rd August 2016. But there was a ratification by more than 50% of the state. The Constitution Bill received the assent of the President on 8th September 2016 and that was enacted as the 101st Constitution Amendment Act of 2016. So this act paved the way for introduction of GST in India. And thus, but due to certain reasons, that implementation was not done at that time in that year. So after that, again, the effort was made and the bill was passed in Lok Sabha in March 2017 and again it received the President's assent and finally GST was implemented in India on 1st July 2017. So here from the EY reports, let's see the timeline of GST, which started from 2006 and ended in 2017, almost 11 years of journey. But as we all know, it was commented by different economists and different analysts, financial analysts, that GST was implemented without much preparations, and there existed a total chaos as to what are the provisions, what should be done by dealers, what should be done by suppliers, etc. So in this course, we will find we'll discuss more about different concepts of GST and different features and objectives, the merits and demerits of GST in the videos to come. Thank you.